One guest never stepped into the light, and someone paid the price. Welcome to Shadow Deduction. I am your host, Cluecraft. Drop where you're tuning in from below. I love reading your replies. Let's begin. It was, as Captain Hastings later insisted, the sort of evening upon which tragedies prefer to unfold. The gathering at Blackridge Manor had been arranged with scrupulous attention to elegance. Lady Winifred Alton, a widow of considerable means and greater reputation, had invited a select company to celebrate the unveiling of a charitable endowment in memory of her late husband. The guests were chosen not merely for social standing, but for influence. A magistrate, a rising member of Parliament, a philanthropist whose donations graced museums across the country, a celebrated concert pianist, and at the urging of Lady Winifred's companion, a certain Belgian gentleman whose fame in matters of crime was no longer confined to the continent. Hercule Poirot had not yet arrived. The manor itself stood upon a gentle rise overlooking a crescent of dark woodland. It was a house of symmetry and quiet grandeur, its windows illuminated like a string of amber lanterns against the deepening blue of the countryside evening. Within, the drawing-room glowed with firelight, crystal chandeliers casting prismatic flecks across polished mahogany and gilt-framed portraits. There were 8 guests in all. 7 of them took their seats for dinner at the long oval table set beneath a ceiling painted with allegorical figures of justice and mercy. The 8th arrived late. He was announced simply as Mr. Adrian Vale, a name that prompted the faintest ripple of recognition among 2 of the guests and a perceptible stiffening of posture from another. He entered without flourish. He was neither young nor old, neither handsome nor plain. His dark suit was impeccably tailored, yet curiously devoid of ornament. His expression bore no particular warmth, nor did it carry the coldness of hostility. What distinguished him, if anything, was his manner of observation. He seemed to see without being seen. When invited to take a seat, Mr. Vale requested, most politely, the chair nearest the far end of the table, just beyond the direct reach of the chandelier's strongest light. "I find," he said in a voice measured and pleasantly neutral, "that bright illumination distracts my appetite." It was a trivial remark. It drew mild laughter, and yet from that moment forward, no one could quite say what he was doing. Throughout the meal, conversation sparkled. Politics, philanthropy, art. Lady Winifred presided with gracious authority. Her pearl necklace rested at her throat like a promise of stability and tradition. The magistrate offered genial pronouncements. The pianist spoke in lyrical phrases about the melancholy of minor keys. And at the edge of the candlelight sat Mr. Vale. He ate sparingly. He drank little. His responses, when solicited, were precise, almost surgical. He complimented the roast. He inquired courteously after a museum acquisition mentioned in passing. But most often he was silent, watching. The footman later testified that he scarcely moved except to raise his glass. One guest, Colonel Ashcombe, would later insist that he caught Mr. Vale observing Lady Winifred with an intensity bordering on calculation. Another swore the man spent half the evening studying the Member of Parliament's cufflinks. But such recollections, as Hercule Poirot would later observe, are the inventions of hindsight. At precisely 10 minutes past 11, Lady Winifred excused herself from the table. "I must fetch the documents," she declared lightly. "The official papers for tomorrow's announcement. I wish you all to see the future you are helping to shape." She left the dining room in excellent spirits. 5 minutes passed. 10. Conversation faltered. A faint sound, no more than the suggestion of something dropped, echoed faintly from the direction of the study. Colonel Ashcombe half rose, but before he could fully stand, Mr. Vale had already done so. "Allow me," he said. His tone was courteous. It was perhaps 20 seconds. Perhaps 20 seconds, perhaps less, before a sharp cry split the stillness. a cry of horror. They found her on the study floor. Lady Winifred Alton lay beside her mahogany writing desk, one hand extended as though reaching for assistance that had not come. The pearl necklace at her throat was broken, its luminous beads scattered like pale tears across the carpet. Her eyes were open. She was quite dead. Mr. Vale stood nearest the body. He did not appear agitated. On the contrary, he seemed contemplative. "She has been struck," he observed calmly. "A heavy object, I think." Indeed, the bronze statuette of justice that had rested upon the desk now lay overturned. A smear, dark, though unmistakable, marked its base. The magistrate recoiled. The pianist covered her mouth. The Member of Parliament began immediately to speak of summoning the authorities. It was Colonel Ashcombe who noticed something else. "The window," he murmured. It stood slightly ajar. A current of cold night air drifted into the study, stirring the scattered pearls. The implication was clear. An intruder, a thief, a desperate assault. And yet, the silver candelabra remained untouched, the desk drawers undisturbed. No sign of forced entry marred the window frame. Mr. Vale bent briefly, just briefly, to retrieve one of the pearls. He rolled it between his fingers. "Curious," he said softly. "Curious?" demanded the magistrate. "That a necklace should break so evenly," Mr. Vale replied. The words seemed absurd in that moment of shock, and the butler had already been dispatched for the police. Within 20 minutes, the manor was no longer a house of celebration, but a sealed chamber of suspicion. No one would be permitted to leave. And so they gathered once more in the drawing-room, 7 living souls and one absence that weighed heavier than any presence. Mr. Vale resumed his seat at the edge of the shadows. If anyone noticed that he had been the first to rise, if anyone considered that he had reached the study before the rest, if anyone reflected upon his curious interest in the broken pearls, no one said so aloud. Outside, the wind moved restlessly through the dark woodland. Inside, the candles burned lower. And somewhere within the elegant symmetry of Blackridge Manor, a lie had already taken root, and the drawing-room had altered in character as swiftly as a face can change when it learns an unpleasant truth. The same velvet curtains, the same pleasant glow of firelight, the same crystal-cut glass upon the sideboard, yet everything now seemed complicit, as though the house itself had conspired to present beauty while sheltering ugliness. Lady Winifred's chair stood empty. The guests sat in uneven clusters, as if unconsciously measuring the distance between one another. The pianist, Miss Celeste Armand, had drawn a shawl about her shoulders, though the room was warm. Sir Lionel Frayne, the magistrate, wiped his spectacles again and again without putting them back on, a nervous habit that gave his broad, sensible face the look of a man squinting at a world he no longer trusted. Mr. Rupert Mallory, the Member of Parliament, spoke in quick, clipped sentences, as though speed might substitute for certainty. And Colonel Ashcombe, military to the marrow, had stationed himself near the mantelpiece, his jaw set, his eyes flicking from one face to another with the grim attention of a man taking inventory after a disaster. At the edge of the lamplight sat Mr. Adrian Vale, hands folded, posture composed. He might have been attending a concert rather than a crime scene. That unnatural calm was, perhaps, the first thing that truly unsettled the others once the immediate horror had begun to cool into something sharper. "You were the first there," the colonel said suddenly, his voice cutting through Mr. Mallory's anxious babble about security and public scandal. Mr. Vale lifted his eyes. "Yes." "And you touched the pearls?" "I picked up one," Mr. Vale corrected mildly. It rolled close to my shoe." Sir Lionel Frayne let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Good God, man, she's murdered, and you speak of pearls as if they were billiard balls." Mr. Vale's gaze shifted, not to Sir Lionel, but to the others, as though weighing whether any of them understood what the magistrate did not. "The pearls," he said, "are not the point. The breaking is. Miss Armand swallowed. What do you mean? Mr. Vale did not answer her at once. Instead, he looked toward the corridor, listening. From somewhere beyond the drawing room came the low murmur of hurried servants and the occasional sharp instruction from the butler. The house was in motion, yet contained, the way water trembles behind a dam. The necklace snapped, Mr. Vale said at last, but not as necklaces usually do when caught or torn in struggle. The beads are scattered evenly, as if the strand gave way all at once. Are you suggesting— What? Mr. Mallory demanded. That she broke it herself? Colonel Ashcombe's eyes narrowed. Or someone broke it for her? Mr. Vale inclined his head slightly, as though pleased the colonel had stepped toward the idea without being pushed. There was a window open, Sir Lionel said, eager to reclaim solid ground. That is what matters. Whoever did this came in from outside. Did he? Mr. Vale asked softly. The magistrate bristled. Don't play games. I do not, Mr. Vale replied. I observe. At that moment the butler appeared. Mr. Denning, a tall man with a face trained into impassivity by years of service to wealth. Yet tonight the mask did not fit as smoothly. It slipped at the edges. The police are on their way, Sir Lionel, he said. To Inspector Webb, from the nearest station. They will arrive shortly. Good, Sir Lionel said, relief making him almost abrupt. Until they do, no one is to leave this room. Do you understand? This is now a matter of law. A faint, dry sound came from Mr. Vale, almost a sigh, almost amusement. Mr. Mallory seized on it instantly. You find this entertaining? Not entertaining, said Mr. Vale. Revealing. That word, revealing, hovered like smoke. Miss Armand's hands trembled. Lady Winifred, she went to fetch papers. For tomorrow, the endowment. Where are they? Shouldn't they be in the study? The question, though innocent, struck with the force of a stone dropped into still water. Ripples of thought spread through the room. Colonel Ashcombe spoke first. If the papers are gone, then this may not be random. It may be. Theft, Sir Lionel said firmly, clinging to what felt reasonable. An intruder came for documents. She surprised him. He struck her. Mr. Vale looked at him with polite patience. And left the silver untouched, the drawers closed, the window without marks, and the house full of witnesses without being seen? Sir Lionel flushed. Are you claiming it was one of us? No one answered. The silence did it for them. Mr. Denning cleared his throat. If I may, Sir Lionel, there was another matter. Before dinner. Sir Lionel's head snapped up. What matter? Mr. Denning hesitated, then continued as though each word cost him. A gentleman came to the house this afternoon, not a guest. He did not give his name. He requested to see Lady Winifred privately. Every eye turned toward him now. And did she see him? Asked Colonel Ashcombe. Yes, sir, Denning replied. In the small morning room, for perhaps 10 minutes. When he left, my lady was upset. Why wasn't this mentioned? Mr. Mallory demanded. Denning spread his hands, a gesture both defensive and weary. Her ladyship told me it was of no consequence. Mr. Vale's eyes had sharpened, only slightly, but enough that Hastings, had he been there, would have recognized the moment when Poirot's little grey cells begin to hum. Mr. Vale did not speak, but his attention fixed upon Denning like a pin. What did this man look like? Colonel Ashcombe asked. Denning frowned, searching memory. Average height, a dark coat, a hat, nothing remarkable. That is to say, if I saw him again, I might not recognize him. Convenient, Sir Lionel muttered. Miss Armand whispered. Perhaps it was blackmail. The word made the air colder than the open window had. Mr. Mallory gave a sharp, nervous laugh. Blackmail? In this house? Really, Miss Armand? This is melodrama. But his laugh did not convince even himself. His hand went to his cuff as if to check it remained fastened there. Mr. Vale's gaze flicked to that small movement and lingered. "No melodrama is required," he said quietly. "Only motives." Sir Lionel drew himself up. "Let us have none of this amateur theorizing. The police will handle it." "Will they?" Mr. Vale asked. The magistrate opened his mouth to retort, but at that instant a new sound rose from the corridor, a brisk tread, purposeful and heavy. The butler stepped aside as if yielding to authority. Inspector Webb entered the drawing room. He was a stout man with an earnest, slightly harried expression, as though he had been pulled from an ordinary evening and thrust into a world of chandeliers and murders. His eyes moved quickly over the guests, taking in silk, jewelry, stiff collars, and fear that tried to look like dignity. "Good evening," he said. "Or not so good, I suppose. Sir Lionel Frayne?" Sir Lionel stepped forward. "Yes. Thank heaven you're here, Inspector. A terrible affair. Lady Winifred Alton has been murdered in her study." Inspector Webb nodded, already making mental notes. "No one has left?" "No one," Sir Lionel said. "We have kept them here." Webb's gaze swept the room again. It paused a fraction longer upon Mr. Vale, whose stillness was somehow more conspicuous than agitation would have been. "And you are?" Webb asked. "Adrian Vale," said Mr. Vale. "Ah, a guest. Any relation to the business of the evening? You were invited." "Yes." Webb grunted. "Right, I'll need statements. But first I want to see the body. Mr. Denning, take me." Denning bowed and led him out. The moment the inspector left, the drawing room seemed to exhale, yet the relief was brief because another presence had been announced by his arrival. The law. With it came consequences, careers, reputations, secrets. Mr. Mallory's voice dropped, thin and urgent. "We must be careful what we say. The newspapers will feast on this." Colonel Ashcombe stared at him. "You're thinking of headlines while she lies dead." "I'm thinking of reality," Mallory snapped, then caught himself and forced a smile that looked like a crack in porcelain. "Forgive me. Shock, you understand." Mr. Vale leaned forward slightly, and his tone gentle enough to sound compassionate. "Shock reveals the true face," he murmured. "It removes the powder." Miss Armand looked as if she might faint. "Why would anyone kill her? Lady Winifred she was good." Sir Lionel's mouth tightened. "Goodness does not prevent enemies. And fortune does not prevent greed," Mr. Vale added, almost to himself. From the corridor came a muffled voice, Inspector Webb's, asking a question. Denning answered. Then the footsteps moved away again, deeper into the house. The guests sat with their thoughts. It was then, so subtly that none could later agree who noticed first, that Mr. Vale's eyes drifted toward the hearth. There, upon the mantelpiece, stood a small porcelain clock. Its painted face smiled up innocently, hands poised at 12 minutes past 11. Except the clock was not ticking. Mr. Vale rose. No one stopped him, perhaps because the others were too drained to object, perhaps because something in his manner suggested he was not a man to be restrained by social outrage. He crossed to the mantelpiece, lifted the clock, and turned it in his hands. A faint, metallic click sounded, soft but distinct. He set it down again, and when he did, the clock began to tick. Miss Armand stared. "What did you do?" Mr. Vale's face did not change, but his voice lowered to a thread. "I restored order." Colonel Ashcombe's gaze sharpened. "Was it stopped before?" Mr. Vale met his eyes. "It was stopped on purpose." Sir Lionel stood abruptly, chair scraping. "What are you implying now?" Mr. Vale's smile was very small. "That someone in this room wanted time to stand still." Sir Lionel's accusation hung in the air like a draught from the open study window. Mr. Vale did not immediately answer. He regarded the magistrate with an expression that was neither defensive nor provocative, but faintly curious, as though Sir Lionel himself were an interesting exhibit placed unexpectedly upon a shelf. "I imply nothing," Mr. Vale said at last. "I observed that the clock had been wound tight. It had not run down naturally. Something prevented its movement." Colonel Ashcombe stepped closer to the mantel. "Prevented? How?" "A small wedge," Mr. Vale replied. "Inserted between the gears. A sliver of metal. It fell free when I adjusted the casing." Sir Lionel stared at the porcelain clock as though it might confess. "And what does that prove?" "It proves," Mr. Vale said softly, "that someone wished the time of Lady Winifred's death to appear fixed." Miss Armand's hand flew to her mouth. 12 minutes past 11. "The moment she left the table," murmured Mr. Mallory. The Colonel's brows drew together. "But we all remember that. She excused herself at 10 past. We heard the sound 5 minutes later. You went to the study almost at once." Mr. Vale inclined his head. "Yes." A subtle shift passed through the room. The timeline, once a comfort, now felt less solid. Sir Lionel's voice hardened. "Inspector Webb will determine the time of death properly." "Indeed," Mr. Vale said. "But if he finds the clock stopped at 12 minutes past 11, he may conclude the blow occurred then. And if the blow did not occur, then—" He let the sentence dissolve. Colonel Ashcombe completed it grimly. "So then someone has falsified the hour." A memory surfaced in Miss Armand's eyes. "When we entered the study, the fire had burned low, yet it was high when we went into dinner. Lady Winifred dislikes a chill." Mr. Mallory glanced at her sharply. "What are you suggesting?" I don't know," she faltered. "Only that time felt strange." Mr. Vale's gaze sharpened with quiet approval. "Time often does, mademoiselle, when it is manipulated." Sir Lionel made a sound of impatience. "This is speculation. We are not detectives." "Some of us," Mr. Vale replied, "are closer to that profession than others." The Colonel's eyes flicked to him again. "You speak as if you have experience." "A little," said Mr. Vale. Before further inquiry could press him, Inspector Webb returned. There was a faint flush in his cheeks, not the kind that comes from climbing stairs quickly or from confronting unpleasant facts. "Right," he said briskly. "Doctor's been sent for, but from what I can see, she's been dead at least half an hour." "Half an hour," Sir Lionel echoed. "But that's impossible. She left us barely." Webb consulted his watch. "It's now 11:47. I'd place the time of death somewhere between 11 and 11:20. Silence spread like ink. Mr. Vale watched the inspector with keen attention. "You're certain?" "As certain as one can be without a medical examination," Webb replied. "The body's already cooling." Colonel Ashcombe's voice was steady, but low. "Then she may have been struck before we heard anything." Webb nodded. "Quite possible. Sound travels oddly in these old houses." Sir Lionel turned slowly toward the others. "Sir, but we were together. All of us." "Were we?" Mr. Vale asked gently. The question unsettled more than any accusation could have done. Mr. Mallory bristled. "Of course we were. We sat at the table." "Until Lady Winifred rose," Mr. Vale said. After that, conversation resumed. Attention shifted. The servants came and went. Glasses were refilled. For how many minutes did each of you look at the others continuously? No one answered. Inspector Webb glanced between them, interest awakening in his eyes. "You suggesting someone slipped out?" "I suggest only that opportunity," Mr. Vale said, "is a creature with many small doors." Miss Armand's gaze darted to the corridor. "But the window—" Webb cut her off. "I've examined it. No mud on the sill, no scratches. The ground outside is damp from the afternoon rain. No footprints beneath the window." Sir Lionel exhaled sharply. "Then the intruder—" "There was no intruder," Colonel Ashcombe said quietly. The words seemed to settle into the carpet. Webb studied the colonel. "You've military experience, sir." "Yes." "Then you know when something smells wrong." Ashcombe nodded once. Inspector Webb turned back to the group. "Until I know more, I'll have to treat this as a confined case. No one leaves the house tonight." A ripple of protest began, but Webb raised a hand. "Spare me. I know it's inconvenient. Murder often is." His gaze shifted again to Mr. Vale. "You seem observant, Mr. Vale. Noticed anything else?" For the briefest instant, something flickered in Mr. Vale's eyes. Calculation, perhaps, or restraint. "Yes," he said. "Lady Winifred's right hand." Webb frowned. What about it?" "She wore rings," Mr. Vale replied. "3, if I recall correctly. Emerald, sapphire, and a plain gold band." Webb's expression changed. There were only 2 on her hand. Sir Lionel blinked. "You're sure?" "I have a good memory," Mr. Vale said calmly. Miss Armand whispered, "The emerald." Inspector Webb's jaw tightened. "You're telling me something was taken." "Or removed earlier," Mr. Vale corrected softly. The inspector gave him a long look. "You're either very helpful, Mr. Vale, or very dangerous." Mr. Vale's smile was faint, almost amused. "Inspector, those qualities are not mutually exclusive." Outside, the wind pressed against the windows, restless and insistent. Inside, the circle of guests had tightened, not physically but psychologically. The window had not been used. The clock had been stopped, and the time of death did not align neatly with their memories. A ring was missing. And somewhere between 11 and 11:20, while candles flickered and polite laughter echoed across polished wood, a woman had died. Inspector Webb straightened. "I'll take statements one by one, starting with you, Colonel." As the colonel moved toward the corridor, Mr. Vale resumed his seat in the half-shadow, his fingers steepled lightly. The game, it seemed, had begun to arrange its pieces. Colonel Ashcombe followed Inspector Webb from the drawing-room with the steady tread of a man accustomed to giving accounts of his actions. The door closed behind them, and the remaining guests were left with the oppressive intimacy of shared suspicion. For a few moments, no one spoke. The fire shifted in the grate, sending a brief cascade of sparks upward. Miss Armand's gaze followed them as though they might offer escape. Mr. Mallory was the first to break. "This is absurd," he muttered, though the edge had dulled in his voice. "We sit here as if in some dreadful stage play." "Life is often poorly staged," Mr. Vale observed quietly, "but the motives are always sincere." Sir Lionel turned on him. "You speak as though you relish this." "I do not relish death," Mr. Vale replied evenly, "but I do not ignore inconsistency." Sir Lionel hesitated, then lowered himself back into his chair. "Very well. Since you appear so intent on observing, perhaps you will enlighten us. You mentioned the missing emerald ring. Why would a murderer take only one ring?" Mr. Vale's fingers traced the arm of his chair, almost absent-mindedly. "To suggest robbery, yet not convincingly. If robbery were the motive, the pearls would have vanished, the sapphire also." Miss Armand shuddered. "Then the ring meant something." "Precisely," Mr. Vale said. Mr. Mallory gave a brittle laugh. "Rings are symbols. Sentiment, engagements, promises." "Or debts," murmured Mr. Vale. The word lingered. Before anyone could press him, the door opened again and Colonel Ashcombe returned. His face was composed, though a faint flush crept along his collar. "Well?" Sir Lionel demanded. "Inspector Webb is thorough," the colonel said. "He wishes to know precisely where each of us sat, who left the table, whether anyone noticed Lady Winifred carrying anything in her hand." "Did she?" Miss Armand asked faintly. "She carried nothing when she rose," Ashcombe replied. "No folder, no documents." Mr. Vale's eyes sharpened slightly. "You are certain?" "I am." Sir Lionel blinked. But she said she was fetching the papers. Yes, Ashcombe said slowly. She said she would fetch them. A thin thread of unease wove tighter. Mr. Vale leaned forward. Then perhaps she did not go to the study for the papers at all. Sir Lionel stared at him. Then why? To meet someone, Miss Armand whispered. Mr. Mallory stiffened. You cannot mean one of us. Mr. Vale's gaze moved over them, unhurried. Lady Winifred received a visitor this afternoon who disturbed her, a man who gave no name. Suppose she recognized him among us tonight. The silence deepened. Sir Lionel shook his head. That is conjecture. Yes, Mr. Vale agreed pleasantly, but it aligns. The door opened once more. Inspector Webb beckoned Sir Lionel next. The magistrate rose with a stiff nod and disappeared into the corridor. The drawing-room seemed to shrink again. Miss Armand shifted in her seat. I do not understand why you are here, Mr. Vale. Forgive me, but you are not connected to Lady Winifred, are you? Mr. Vale regarded her gently. Not personally. Then why were you invited? She pressed. Before he could respond, Mr. Mallory spoke. Lady Winifred was known for curious guest lists. Intellectual variety, she called it. Mr. Vale's faint smile returned. She appreciated precision. And you possess it. Mallory's tone was edged. I attempt to. Mallory's fingers toyed with his cuff again, twisting the gold link. Mr. Vale's eyes followed the movement once more. You are uncomfortable, Mr. Vale said quietly. Anyone would be, Mallory snapped. Not because of murder, Mr. Vale replied. Because of implication. Mallory rose abruptly. This is intolerable. Colonel Ashcombe stood as well. Sit down, man. Storming about will only make you appear guilty. The word hung there, heavy and unavoidable. Mallory's color drained. I am not guilty. No one has accused you, Ashcombe said evenly. Mr. Vale watched the exchange with an attentiveness that was almost scientific. The door opened again. Sir Lionel returned, lips pressed thin, and Inspector Webb gestured for Miss Armand. She rose unsteadily. As she passed Mr. Vale, he spoke softly. Mademoiselle, when you entered the study earlier, did you notice the curtains? She paused, startled. The curtains? Yes. They were drawn, she said after a moment. Half drawn, I think. And the lamp upon the desk? It was lit. Mr. Vale inclined his head. Merci. Miss Armand departed, confusion clouding her features. Sir Lionel sank into his chair. What does that matter? Mr. Vale's eyes gleamed faintly. If Lady Winifred intended merely to fetch papers, she would not draw curtains nor light a lamp unless she expected conversation. Sir Lionel's expression faltered. Someone met her there, Mr. Vale continued softly. Not an intruder from the woods, but a guest from the table. Colonel Ashcombe exhaled slowly. You speak as though certain. I'm certain of only one thing, Mr. Vale replied. Lady Winifred left us alive. She was dead before 11:20. The clock was tampered with. A ring is missing. The window was a deception, and she did not carry papers. Sir Lionel stared into the fire. Then the motive lies not in theft, but in history. Exactly, said Mr. Vale. Inspector Webb reappeared with Miss Armand, whose face had grown pale but composed. Mr. Mallory, the inspector called. Mallory hesitated only a second before stepping forward. As the door closed behind him, a faint sound echoed down the corridor, a muffled exclamation. Not loud, but sharp enough to freeze those remaining in the drawing-room. Colonel Ashcombe turned toward the sound. What was that? Before anyone could answer, the butler hurried past the open doorway, face drained of color. Mr. Vale rose smoothly. Another irregularity, he murmured. And in that moment it became clear that whatever Inspector Webb had discovered in the study, it had shifted the balance once more. Mr. Vale moved with a quiet decisiveness that made the others follow almost without choice. Colonel Ashcombe was beside him at once, his instinct for emergencies overriding etiquette. Sir Lionel, reluctant but anxious, came after. As and behind them, like a shadow uncertain of its own courage, drifted Miss Armand. The corridor outside the drawing-room was lit by wall sconces whose flames flickered as though disturbed by unseen breath. Somewhere farther along, a door stood open, the study. Voices rose and fell inside it, Inspector Webb's brisk, controlled tone, Denning's strained replies, and now, threaded through them, the unmistakable sound of Mr. Mallory's agitation. "What do you mean it's gone?" Mallory's voice cracked. "That's impossible." Mr. Vale paused at the threshold, not entering at once. He listened first, always listening as though words and pauses were more revealing than objects. Inspector Webb noticed him and frowned. "You lot were told to stay in the drawing-room," Colonel Ashcombe answered before Mr. Vale could. There was a cry. Webb's lips tightened, but he did not argue. Instead, he gestured sharply toward the desk. "Look at this, Colonel, and you, Sir Lionel, since you're so fond of procedure." The study looked much as it had, the overturned bronze statuette, the scattered pearls like pale seeds across the carpet, the lamp glowing on the desk with a steady yellow eye. Yet something had shifted, not in the arrangement of objects, but in the impression they created. It felt less like a scene of sudden violence now, and more like a room that had been prepared. Webb tapped the edge of the desk with a thick forefinger. "When I first came in, these drawers were shut. Denning swore they'd not been touched. Fine, then I opened this bottom drawer." He pulled it out just far enough to reveal its emptiness. "It's been cleared," Webb said. "Not rummaged, cleared. Like someone removed a bundle cleanly. And there's a faint rectangle of dust, see? Something was kept here for a long while." Sir Lionel stared. "The endowment documents?" "Maybe," Webb said. "Or maybe something else." Mr. Mallory, who stood near the window, ran a hand over his hair as if trying to smooth his thoughts into order. But Lady Winifred said she was fetching them. They must have been here. Mr. Vale's gaze flicked to the lamp, to the half-drawn curtains, to the statuette, then to the window, still slightly ajar. "And the window?" Mr. Vale asked. Webb grunted. "Still no footprints. Still no marked." Mr. Vale stepped into the room at last. He did so with care, avoiding the pearls and the darker stain near the fallen statuette, as if the room were a chessboard and each square mattered. "You said there was an exclamation," Mr. Vale remarked, looking at Webb. "What produced it? The drawer?" Webb hesitated, then jerked his chin toward Mr. Mallory. "I asked him a simple question, that's all, whether he'd ever seen Lady Winifred keep anything of value in that drawer, and he reacted like I'd struck him." Mallory's eyes flashed. "Because it's insulting. You talk of value like we're thieves." "Some are," Webb said bluntly. Mr. Vale's voice cut in gently. "Inspector, you said the drawer was cleared, not searched. That implies someone knew exactly what to remove." Webb nodded. "Yes, and knew where it was," Mr. Vale added. Mallory's throat worked. "Are you accusing me?" "I accuse no one," Mr. Vale replied. "I arrange facts." Colonel Ashcombe looked from one man to another. "Oh, then the murder and the missing papers are linked." Sir Lionel's voice was hoarse. "Or the missing ring is linked, the emerald." At that, Mr. Mallory flinched, so quick a movement it might have been mistaken for a twitch, except that Mr. Vale's eyes sharpened instantly. "You know of the ring," Mr. Vale said softly. Mallory snapped back too fast. "Everyone knows now." Mr. Vale's gaze remained steady. "Yes, everyone knows it is missing, but not everyone is startled by the word emerald." Silence thickened. Inspector Webb's face hardened. "Right, that's enough dancing. Mr. Mallory, you'll come with me when we're done here." Mallory's voice rose, brittle with outrage. On what grounds? On grounds that you're sweating in a cold room, Webb retorted. Thus, and because you keep looking at that window like you'd like to jump through it. Mallory turned toward the window, almost involuntarily, and then caught himself. His hands clenched, then forced themselves open. Mr. Vale moved closer to the desk lamp. He examined it without touching, leaning so the light cast sharp lines over his face. Then his eyes went to the bronze statuette on the floor. "May I?" he asked Webb, indicating the statuette. Webb's suspicion flared. "What for?" "To see if it is truly the weapon," Mr. Vale replied. Webb hesitated, then nodded curtly. "Careful." Mr. Vale stooped and lifted the statuette with a handkerchief drawn neatly from his pocket. He turned it, studying the base, the smear of blood, the angles of metal. "The blow came from behind," he murmured, more to himself than anyone. "Downward, and the person was taller than Lady Winifred, or she was seated." Sir Lionel swallowed. She could have been seated at the desk. "Yes," Mr. Vale agreed, "and the lamp was lit for reading, or signing." Colonel Ashcombe's voice was low. "If she was signing something, that would explain the cleared drawer." Mr. Vale set the statuette down gently. His eyes went again to the pearls scattered across the carpet. Then he did something small and startling. He stepped to the fireplace and crouched, peering at the ashes. "What are you doing?" Webb demanded. Mr. Vale's hand hovered above the grate, not touching. "Asking what Lady Winifred tried to destroy." Sir Lionel blinked. "Destroy?" Mr. Vale pointed. Amid the ash lay a curled fragment of paper, blackened at the edges but not fully consumed. A faint strip of ink survived. 2 letters, perhaps 3. Webb leaned in sharply, then swore under his breath. "Denning! Why wasn't this mentioned?" Denning appeared in the doorway, pale and rigid. I did not see it, Inspector." Mr. Vale's voice remained calm. "Because you were looking for what you expected. Forced entry, stolen silver, muddy footprints. But the truth is often in the hearth, Inspector, not in the window." Webb straightened, jaw tight, eyes hard. "Fine. Then we'll take it out, bag it, and have it examined." Mr. Vale rose smoothly. "Examination may help, yes. But the most important thing is already clear." "And what's that?" Webb demanded. Mr. Vale looked not at the inspector but at Mr. Mallory. "That the person who lit the lamp and drew the curtains believed they had time," Mr. Vale said softly. "And the person who stopped the clock wanted everyone else to believe it happened quickly." Mallory's mouth opened, then closed again. For the first time, his practiced composure faltered into something naked. Fear, or perhaps the realization that his own mind had been read aloud. Outside, the wind sighed against the glass. Inside, the circle tightened once more. This time, not around a dead woman, but around the living who had reasons to wish she were silent. By the time dawn thinned the darkness beyond the tall windows of Blackridge Manor, exhaustion had stripped away pretense. The guests, no longer merely guests, but suspects bound by a shared catastrophe, sat once more in the drawing-room. Inspector Webb stood near the hearth, arms folded. The doctor had come and gone. The body had been removed. Statements had been taken, retaken, as I compared. The charred scrap of paper rested in an evidence envelope on a side table. The emerald ring had not been found, and Mr. Adrian Vale had been very quiet. It was he who now rose. "Inspector," he said gently, "with your permission, I should like to address everyone." Webb studied him. Suspicion had long since evolved into reluctant respect. "If you've something useful, out with it." Mr. Vale inclined his head and turned to the others. The morning light revealed what the lamplight had softened. Fatigue, strained nerves, and beneath them, guilt in one face alone. "Lady Winifred did not die at 12 minutes past 11, he began calmly. The clock was stopped to suggest that moment, but the body's condition, the cooling and the fire in the study, Tell us she died earlier, closer to 11. Sir Lionel shifted uneasily. We were at table at 11. Were you? Mr. Vale asked mildly. Not all of you continuously. He began to pace, not hurriedly but with deliberate symmetry, as though aligning invisible threads. Lady Winifred announced she would fetch documents, but she carried none when she left. Colonel Ashcombe noticed this. That is important. She went not for papers, but to meet someone privately. Miss Armand clasped her hands tightly. Sir Lionel's jaw set. The lamp was lit, the curtains drawn. She expected discussion, perhaps confrontation, and in the drawer was something long kept and recently removed. Inspector Webb nodded. The cleared drawer. Yes, a document, something of value, not monetary alone. Mr. Vale turned to Mr. Mallory. You knew what was kept there. Mallory's face had grown ashen. I did not. You reacted to the mention of value before anyone specified what that value was, Mr. Vale replied. And you flinched at the word emerald. Mallory swallowed. The emerald ring, Mr. Vale continued, was not stolen for profit. It was removed because it symbolized something. A pledge, an agreement, or more precisely, a promise. Sir Lionel frowned. What promise? Mr. Vale stopped pacing. Lady Winifred's late husband financed certain ventures. Not all were charitable. Some involved political backing, discreet arrangements, written assurances. Inspector Webb's eyes narrowed. Blackmail. Insurance, Mr. Vale corrected softly. The document in that drawer was proof of one such arrangement. A written promise, signed years ago. He looked directly at Mr. Mallory. A promise made by you. The silence that followed was absolute. To Mallory's lips trembled. That is absurd. You are not yet a member of Parliament, Mr. Vale continued. You required funding. Lady Winifred's husband provided it, in exchange for influence later. After his death, she retained the document. Mallory's voice cracked. You have no proof. The hearth, Mr. Vale said gently. Inspector Webb stiffened. The burned paper? Yes. Lady Winifred was destroying the document. She had decided to release you from the obligation. Mallory stared, stunned. She summoned you privately this afternoon. Mr. Vale went on. The unnamed visitor, you came to ensure the document was truly destroyed, but you feared she might change her mind. At dinner, when she announced she would fetch the papers, you believed she meant the document. Mallory's breathing grew ragged. You followed her, as the others were distracted. You entered the study. She lit the lamp and drew the curtains to speak freely. You demanded the document. She refused, perhaps to make you feel the weight of it. In anger, you seized the nearest object. Mr. Vale's gaze flicked to the bronze statuette. You struck her. Mallory shook his head weakly. No. She fell. In panic, you searched the drawer and removed the document, finding only its absence. She had already begun to burn it. You tore the emerald ring from her hand, perhaps as payment, perhaps in rage. Then you staged the scene. Inspector Webb stepped closer. The window, he said. Yes, Mr. Vale nodded. Open to suggest intrusion, the pearls scattered deliberately. The clock stopped to compress the timeline. You returned to the dining room before suspicion settled. Mallory's shoulders sagged. But you miscalculated one thing, Mr. Vale added softly. Mallory looked up, hollow-eyed. You assumed the destruction of the document freed you. In truth, it freed her. She had chosen to release you from the promise. The paper in the hearth was proof she meant to end it. A strangled sound escaped Mallory's throat. You killed her, Mr. Vale said quietly, for a threat that no longer existed. Inspector Webb's hand closed firmly around Mallory's arm. Mallory did not resist. He stared at nothing, whispering, She said she would ruin me. She said she might reconsider. And you chose fear over trust. Mr. Vale replied. Webb led him toward the door. As it closed behind them, the drawing room seemed larger, emptier. Sir Lionel exhaled slowly. "How did you know?" Mr. Vale allowed himself the faintest smile. "Because," he said, "sir, when one studies human nature, one sees that the greatest crimes are committed not for gain, but for imagined loss." Miss Armand rose shakily. "You are not merely a guest, are you?" Mr. Vale adjusted his cuffs with meticulous care. "No," he admitted. "I am Hercule Poirot." The name settled into the room like a final, precise note. Colonel Ashcombe gave a short, incredulous laugh. "The Belgian detective. At your service." Sir Lionel shook his head. "And the emerald?" Poirot's eyes twinkled faintly. "Inspector Webb will find it in Mr. Mallory's coat pocket. He kept it, not as treasure, but as reassurance." Miss Armand looked toward the pale morning light filtering through the curtains. "How tragic." "Yes," Poirot said softly. "Tragic and instructive. Order, mes amis, must always be preserved. But the greatest disorder lies not in rooms or clocks." He glanced toward the study. "It lies in the human heart." With that, Hercule Poirot took his hat, straightened its angle with exacting precision, and prepared to depart Blackridge Manor, leaving behind a house restored to silence and a truth that had waited patiently in the shadows to be seen.